There's something strange about this Chinese spy balloon that just got shot down, and nobody seems to be talking about it.
Yucca, the first of the 3 high-altitude shots, was prepared and launched from the flight deck of the aircraft carrier USS Boxer. All of Yucca's blast and nuclear radiation instrumentation and a portion of the thermal instrumentation were concentrated in 5 canisters suspended below the weapon at intervals out to 3,000 feet. These instruments were designed to be activated prior to burst time by telemetered commands. At 1125 hours on 28 April, when the Yucca balloon was released, the USS Boxer was operating about 90 nautical miles northeast of Nan Island, Bikini Atoll, maintaining a deck wind velocity of near 0. 2½ hours later, 1440 hours, at an approximate altitude of 85,000 feet, Yucca was detonated by radio command signal. Failure of the telemeter command transmitter to activate the canister instruments prior to burst time resulted in almost complete loss of data from the balloon dragline equipment.
In the 1950s, the United States government started testing nuclear devices detonated from balloons. Enter Project Yucca, the balloon nuclear detonation test as part of Operation Hardtack. Quote, Yucca was the codename of the first unique high-altitude test of a nuclear device ever carried out by a stratospheric balloon. The main goal of the United States Department of Defense and Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory was to study the effect of the detonation of a W-25 air defense warhead at high altitude as part of the developmental work of an anti-ballistic missile. This test, along with 2 other exo-atmospheric detonations, performed using rocket-borne warheads of a megaton scale codenamed Teak and Orange, were included under Operation Newsreel as part of Operation Hardtack. As occurred in most nuclear tests, it was necessary to set up a series of monitoring stations and instrumented vehicles to retrieve the data at the moment of the explosion. The measurements of the electromagnetic pulse generated by the blast was performed by the Army Signal Research and Development Laboratory from 2 stations located at Wotho and Kusale, approximately 100 miles and 460 miles from Bikini, respectively. Balloon flight testing for Yucca began in 1956 at various locations in the United States, like Vernalis Naval Air Station in California, Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico, and Goodfellow Air Force Base in Texas. In all, a total of 76 balloons were launched in preparation for the event. And on the morning of April 28, 1958, the USS Boxer departed from Bikini to the launch point. After the bomb was assembled and armed, the balloon was released at 11:25. During ascent, the nuclear device was separated from the balloon at a distance of 568 feet by a hydraulic load lowering device. And the measurement instrumentation was additionally deployed along a nylon line at specific intervals totaling 3,000 feet below it. At 12:50, the balloon reached a floating altitude of 85,000 feet, and finally at 14:40, the nuclear device was detonated by radio command in a point located 85 miles northeast of Enewetak. The device produced a yield of 1.7 kilotons, a small amount for the standard of the times. The fact that an electromagnetic pulse is produced by a nuclear explosion was known since the very first days of nuclear weapons testing. But the magnitude of the EMP and the significance of its effects were not realized for some time. According to the data published in the final report of Hardtack, which was declassified several years later, Yucca provided the first indication in United States testing that high-altitude EMP could be more than 100 times as intense as a low-altitude EMP. So basically what this article is saying is that the United States tested a nuclear device, a very small one at that, on a balloon to measure the effects of the EMP. And what they found was when an EMP is produced or a nuclear device is detonated in high altitude, it creates a pulse that is 1,000 times stronger than the low altitude EMP. Now, what would happen if an EMP actually hit America? Well, according to this report, it doesn't look very good. In fact, a congressional report states that, quote, an EMP attack would kill 90% of all Americans. 90%. Quote, in a U.S. House of Representatives hearing on Thursday, members of the recently defunded EMP Commission informed Congress of the devastation an electromagnetic pulse attack could inflict on the country. In a commissioned report, former EMP Commission Chairman William Graham and its former Chief of Staff Peter Vincent Perry referred to North Korea using an EMP as a doomsday scenario. It could use its demonstrated satellite launcher to carry a nuclear weapon over the South Polar region and detonate it over the United States to create a high-altitude electromagnetic pulse. The result could be to shut down the electric U.S. power grid for an indefinite period, leading to the death within a year of up to 90% of all Americans. 90% of Americans. Think about that. And what we just saw flying over our country could be a precursor to this exact scenario. On March 26, 2019, President Trump signed Executive Order 13865, coordinating national resilience to electromagnetic pulses, which establishes resilience and security standards for the U.S. critical infrastructure as a national priority initiative. EO 13865 states, quote, an electromagnetic pulse, EMP, has the potential to disrupt, degrade, and damage technology and critical infrastructure systems. Human-made or naturally occurring EMPs can affect large geographic areas, disrupting elements critical to the nation's security and economic prosperity, and could adversely affect global commerce and stability. The federal government must foster sustainable, efficient, and cost-effective approaches to improving the nation's resilience to the effect of EMPs. This is the report of the Commission to Assess the Threat to the United States from an EMP Attack. Volume 1 is from 2004. Now it's pretty long, so I'm just going to show you some of the highlights. Quote, the nature of EMP threat. High-altitude EMP results from the detonation of a nuclear warhead at altitudes about 40 to 400 kilometers above the Earth's surface. The immediate effects of EMP are disruption of and damage to electronic systems and electrical infrastructure. EMP is not reported in the scientific literature to have direct effects on people in the parameter range of present interest. What is significant about an EMP attack is that one or few high-altitude nuclear detonations can produce EMP effects that can potentially disrupt or damage electronic and electrical systems over much of the United States, virtually simultaneous at a time determined by an adversary. Now this figure here shows a EMP detonation above the United States, above Chicago, can take out all electrical power on the east coast of the United States. And I'm not just talking about the lights shut off, I'm talking about all electrical systems are fried and permanently disabled. Each critical infrastructure in the US is dependent upon other infrastructures, and it has a little diagram here showing you how every bit of this country is interlinked and relies on each other for success. All of the critical functions of US society and related infrastructures, electric power, telecommunications, energy, financial, transportations, emergency services, water, food, etc., have electronic devices embedded in most aspects of their systems, often providing critical controls. Electric power has thus emerged as an essential service underlying US society and all of its other critical infrastructures. Telecommunications has grown to a critical level but may not rise to the same as electrical power in terms of risk to the nation's survival. All other infrastructures and critical functions are dependent upon the support of electric power and telecommunications. Therefore, we must make special efforts to prepare and protect these two high-leverage systems. Basically, what it was saying is one EMP over the United States could collapse the nation permanently. And what just happened now with this balloon should be an eye-opener for everybody. Food infrastructure. Quote, EMP can damage or disrupt the infrastructure that supplies food to the population of the United States. Recent federal efforts to better protect the food infrastructure from terrorist attack tend to focus on preventing small-scale disruption of the food infrastructure, such as would result from a terrorist poisoning some food. Yet an EMP attack could potentially disrupt the food infrastructure over a large region encompassing many cities for a protracted period of weeks to months. I mean, if you actually think about it, If an EMP was to detonate over the United States in the center, or multiple, we would be facing an all-out collapse. There would be no water, there would be no food, there would be no gasoline, no cars driving. And if your car did somehow make it through the EMP, like if you have an older car or something, how are you going to fill up your gas tank? So basically, you're stuck with what you have at that exact moment when it happens, with millions of people who are going to be hungry and thirsty and trying to find a way to feed themselves. So what do you think about this? Do you think this Chinese balloon was actually a spy balloon? Or do you believe what the Chinese say, that it was a weather balloon? Or do you think it was some sort of nuclear device carrier that was meant to test the waters, so to speak, and see how far it can go before getting shot?
Ivan, China doubling down, issuing some strong words after the U.S. downed the balloon?
That's right. Beijing is now saying that if the U.S. flies a balloon over China, it'll probably shoot it down. Look at this statement coming from the Chinese Defense Ministry. Quote, "The U.S. used force to attack our civilian unmanned airship, which is an obvious overreaction. We express solemn protest against this move by the U.S. side and reserve the right to use necessary means to deal with similar situations." There has been a shift in the tone from Beijing. On Friday evening, the Chinese Foreign Ministry expressed regret, saying that its airship, as it described it, which was used primarily for research purposes, had blown off course over the U.S. And now the Chinese government, different ministries, are protesting the fact that this U.S. fighter jet shot the balloon down. The damage on the diplomatic front has already been visible, with the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken postponing a trip that he was supposed to make this weekend to Beijing over this balloon scandal, and calling the existence of this balloon over U.S. airspace a violation of U.S. sovereignty and of international law. The Chinese response has been, hey, this is this is due to weather, it's out of our control. They have been communicating with their U.S. counterparts, but this has clearly done some damage to what was an effort that began in November between President Biden and the Chinese leader Xi Jinping when they met face-to-face at the G20 summit in Bali to try to basically put a stop to the downward spiraling relations between the world's two largest economies. We'll just have to see whether there can be any efforts to revive diplomacy in the wake of this, I would argue, a growing crisis.
We're learning, Gordon, this is not the first time China has spied on the U.S. Far from it, in fact. But the audacity, the gall, it seems like China has elevated their risk at this point. What type of information are they gathering, and for what purpose, do you think?
Well, this balloon flew over Malmstrom, Minot, F.E. Warren, Offutt, and Whiteman Air Force bases. And those, as you point out, they're ICBM, intercontinental ballistic missile sites. Offutt is where Strategic Command is headquartered. This looks like they're preparing a first strike on the U.S. I mean, this is absolutely serious because we're not mentally prepared. We don't think of the Chinese in that term, but clearly that's one of the things they could be doing here.
And as those tensions escalate, what are you watching for specifically from China, Gordon? And how should President Biden be responding at this point? How would you advise the administration?
Well, the thing to look for would be what the Chinese military is doing, because they've become especially politically powerful in Beijing. And this could be a situation like 1930s Japan, where a military takes over a country and goes to war. And we know that the Chinese military right now actually controls a lot of the foreign policy. With regard to President Biden, he needs to start looking at China not as a dialogue partner, but as an enemy that poses a critical threat to the United States. He should be having, I think he should be trying to cut contacts with China right now, not trying to talk to China, because China doesn't really want to talk to us. If they wanted to, they would have allowed Secretary of State Antony Blinken to go to Beijing on February 5 and 6. But with this provocation, it looks like they wanted to derail those talks. So we should stop trying to talk, because by trying to talk, we embolden the worst elements in the Chinese political system by showing that China can do anything, and we will still try to maintain dialogue.
They would have also warned us that a balloon would be flying over some of our nuclear missile silos here. before we caught it ourselves. This also comes at a time, Gordon, when China is buying up a lot of U.S. land. Why is the U.S. government allowing an adversary to do this?
It shouldn't be. We know that China is engaged in some very suspicious activities. There's been a lot of publicity, for instance, about the Grand Forks Air Force Base, where a Chinese company bought 370 acres within 12 miles. But we also know in Oklahoma, there are very, very concerning and troubling developments. So, for instance, there are these illegal Chinese marijuana grows. There was gangland murders. 4 Chinese nationals were killed. There are hints that China is actually basing child sex trafficking operations on Oklahoma land. In Oklahoma, the Chinese parties are building fences, and everybody in Oklahoma has a fence, but people in Oklahoma build fences to keep people out. The Chinese are building fences to keep people in. And so we shouldn't be allowing Chinese to own any land in any farm or ranch land until we figure out what's going on.
Also, we have to talk about the infiltration of TikTok. Chinese video streaming app has alarmed lawmakers and privacy experts all around the world. How dangerous is TikTok, Gordon? How worried should we be?
We should be extremely concerned because TikTok poses 2 national security threats. First of all, it is taking information from 86 million phones in the U.S. that can be used later for intimidation and blackmail. And clearly, they're using that information in their artificial intelligence systems. But also China is propagating narratives through TikTok, through the algorithm, which determines what users see and what they don't see. Last year, Beijing used TikTok to amplify Russian disinformation. We know that TikTok has been glorifying drug use, which is Beijing's plan to weaken the United States. In this context, we should be thinking of fentanyl. So TikTok should not be allowed in the U.S. unless it's entirely owned by a U.S. company which controls the algorithm. Control of the algorithm is critical.
China expert and best-selling author Gordon Chang, always a pleasure to talk to you and get your expertise on this subject. We appreciate you joining us this morning here on the National Desk. Have a great week.